Ready to Love Fort Worth Episode 2 review. So I saw this episode last night, and this was yet another episode that I had mixed feelings about. On one hand, the episode had some visually stunning women on it, but on the other hand, I didn't feel like I learned as much about these cast members as I did in episode 1. And that could be because episode 1 had 9 people to flesh out, and this episode tried their best to flesh out 10 people, but they came up short in my opinion. And just like the first episode, my issue with this episode was the show's decision to allow one of the singles to get eliminated. I think it's unfair to either group that they couldn't meet each other prior to anybody getting eliminated, because for all we know, the perfect match for somebody in group 1 might have been in group 2 and vice versa. But if I had to rate this episode, I would give it a solid 6.5. The episode definitely captured my attention, and I like the change in the show's format, which gives a deserving single immunity from elimination, but I honestly feel that half of these singles shouldn't have even been cast for the show. And I truly believe that this season is a powder keg of drama waiting to explode. Now with that being said, for the remainder of the video, I want to share my thoughts on the women and the men for this episode, and as always, ladies first. And for the women, I want to pretend to be one of the single guys on the show, and I want to rank the women from the best to worst match for guys like me, and for the process. The first woman on my list is Maya. From a visual perspective, Maya is very attractive, and she does not have on any excessive makeup, nor does she have one of those builder bodies. And don't get me wrong, if a woman decides to alter her body with surgery, then that is her personal choice and I can't fault her for that. But for guys like me, we truly appreciate women who can keep their bodies as natural as possible. But in addition to Maya's good looks, I appreciate how Maya carried herself with class, and she lets the guys know up front what she's looking for and what her standards are. The reason why Maya was able to earn immunity for this episode was because she's a good listener. She met all of the guys, tried to form her own personal connections with each of them, and in my opinion, she's taken the process very seriously. On Ready to Love, it's always refreshing to see women on the show that are willing to put some skin in the game, and with her, we see her not feeling too timid to put herself out there and to make a great impression on the men. In this episode, we see Jonathan making a connection with Maya, and I think it's a little too soon to see if the connection will go anywhere, but I do believe that when Maya meets Dominique for the first time, she'll likely shift her focus on him, and she'll see if he feels the same way about her. Next on my list is Vanessa. Vanessa is another attractive woman who seems to embrace being natural, which I completely love. But what prevented me from putting Vanessa at the top of the list was some of the baggage that she came into the process with. She is a flight attendant. She's already been married before, and there were several times in the process where she was socially awkward towards the men. Now don't get me wrong, there's absolutely nothing wrong with women who work as flight attendants, but some of the flight attendants that I know tend to stay away from home for several days in a row, and they even might have to work on nights and weekends. And in my opinion, that type of work schedule might not fly with a guy, no pun intended, if the guy wants a woman that has a normal working schedule. And with Vanessa already being married before, I think that she ultimately came into the process with a good heart, but I'm just not sure that she had truly healed from her divorce and was ready to give dating an honest shot. Nevertheless, I put Vanessa high on the list because out of all the guys on the show, I see myself most like Chaz, and seeing how Chaz and Vanessa interacted let me know that Vanessa may have been awkward with the other men because the personalities just clashed with each other, and Chaz was somebody that could offer her substance. And say what you want about Vanessa, but I admire her for having standards and sticking to them, like when Brother Lamar asked if she would be willing to go on a nude beach as a first date. Most guys that I know would have never asked that to a complete stranger, but Vanessa held her guns, even at the risk of being eliminated, which I fully respect. Now in the middle of the pack, I have Laylin, and from a visual perspective, Laylin is easily the most attractive woman on the show. She may have some alterations to her body, which again is within her rights to do, but from head to toe, she's a bona fide goddess, and in my opinion, her feminine energy really has a way of captivating every guy that she comes across. I'll even acknowledge that Laylin made a point to fully participate in the process and making a genuine effort to get to know the men. However, I did see a few red flags with Laylin. One of those red flags was the infamous list that she carries around with her, and this is of criteria that the men must meet in order to be with her. It reminds me of Sabrina from the Potomac season. On the list are things like having a man that can help her wash her hair and having a guy with fresh breath. I'm not sure if Laylin is going to fully be committed to finding a guy that meets all of her criteria, but I definitely know that she's fully aware of her own value and she definitely won't settle for less. But the other red flag that I saw with Laylin was how she was approaching the process. During the trivia game, it was clear that Maya was Laylin's biggest threat, and while Laylin didn't show any hate towards Maya for winning, I could tell that she was more interested in winning than finding a potential husband. I truly believe that Laylin will approach the process with a lot of strategy, and whenever men have the power to eliminate, she will flirt with them and string them along to avoid elimination. But when the women get the power to eliminate, then she will do whatever it takes to get to the finale. We've seen this happen before in several seasons, and this type of moment usually ends with the woman being single by the end of the reunion episode. But in this episode, I think Laylin's best connection was with Alonzo. Sadly, I think Alonzo will have Laylin on his radar until he sees Mika from the first group, and then all bets are off. Now the list only goes downhill from here. Next we have Patrice, and I'll admit that Patrice is an attractive woman, but she is tatted up. And some guys may love a tatted up woman, but for guys like me, all the tattoos are a turn-off, and it's all a matter of personal preference. I also think that Patrice may be a victim of bad editing for the episode. And this is because she really doesn't get a whole lot of screen time, and when she does, it's usually to talk about sex or sex toys. I won't hold that against her for this review, but I do hope that I get to see more substance for her in the future episodes. Now for this episode, we see that her best connection was with Alonzo, and she loves the fact that Alonzo is a younger guy. From what I saw, there's definitely chemistry between them, and I would like to see where it goes. Next up, there's Rashina, and I hate to say it, but she's really not my cup of tea. I think that she could be an amazing woman if given the chance to get to know her, but I wouldn't get past the whole excessive makeup and weave thing. I know that she owns her own hair salon, and she believes in enhancing her own beauty, but for guys like me, we like women who like to keep it as natural as possible because we don't like the feeling of being catfished after feelings and money have been invested into the process. But in addition to that, Rashina admitted that she's really not good at dating, and it showed throughout this episode. We saw her make small talk with several guys, and as a guy, it's nearly impossible to move a woman out of the friend zone if there's limited physical attraction and she's only talking about surface level things. This explains why she was nominated for elimination in this episode. And yeah, she did appear to be comfortable when sharing her thoughts on sex with Alonzo, but in this process, the guys are looking for substance, and the sex talk will only carry a woman but so far. Now in this episode, we see Rashina have her strongest connection with Chaz, and from a personality perspective, I think Chaz appreciates her. But I don't think that Chaz is all that physically attracted to her, because he made it perfectly clear that he doesn't like a woman with a whole lot of makeup, and Rashina is out here looking like the Joker from Batman. I think going forward, Rashina may tame down her beauty enhancers, or Chaz will simply keep her around to avoid getting eliminated, so the choice is ultimately hers. And lastly, there's Patricia. And in my predictions video, I selected Patricia as a lock for elimination, and this was solely based on looks. But I do think it's worth mentioning that if you see the individual cast pictures for this season of Ready to Love, Glenn and Patricia are the only ones that have pictures of them standing outside and looking into the distance. Coincidence, anybody? But even if the men found Patricia to be physically attractive, Patricia seemingly came into the process very judgmental of the guys that she met and still broken from her experience with past relationships. We see this in this episode as she fails to talk past all the surface level things, and when she asked multiple guys if they were willing to suck toes, which was completely left field. Patricia made comments to suggest that it's a man's job to create a safe space for her in order for her to become vulnerable with him. And to that, I say that the devil is a lie. You see, good people, if I were on the show and I heard Patricia say that to me, then I would treat her like a bill collector and avoid her. To sit back on your throne and require me to jump through hoops and hurdles in order to make you feel comfortable with me means that you came into the process to find a man that was patient, agreeable, and fit everything that you needed for him to be, but it doesn't seem like Patricia wanted to reciprocate any of that energy. And if she expects me to trust her off rip, but it would take me a while to gain her trust, then the connection was over before it had a chance to take off. And sadly, I see a lot of women out here like Patricia, and I hope that Patricia fully heals before jumping back into the dating scene. So after finishing with all the women, I want to shift my focus on the men, and in this list, I'll discuss which guys are the best for the women in the process, and I'll work my way down from there. First, I want to talk about Jonathan, and I think out of all the guys, Jonathan may be the best for the women in this episode. Jonathan seems to be the most open-minded with all the women that he meets in order to make an effort to get to know them. One thing that I admire about Jonathan is his ability to read the room. And when he encounters a woman that's only given him a surface level connection, he makes a last ditch effort to see if the connection can be salvageable before moving on. In this episode, we see Jonathan move this way with Vanessa and Patricia. Now in my predictions video, I had Jonathan as a lock for elimination, and after seeing this episode, I'm not ready to change my pick as of yet. And I know that I said that Jonathan was the best for the women in this episode, but I truly feel that Jonathan's woman is not on this show. I think that some of the connections that Jonathan made with the women were a means of the women avoiding elimination, but I would like to be wrong on that. Next up, I will select Chaz, and I truly admire Chaz for being a straight shooter and telling the woman what he wants and what he's looking for. I have Chaz below Jonathan because even though Chaz really doesn't have high standards, the standards that he has will eliminate several women as a possible connection. And if that happens, then Chaz will eventually be eliminated from the show, because if there's one thing that we know about the Ready to Love process, it's that the show tends to reward cast members who have the most fake connections. Next up is Alonzo, and if we're being honest, Alonzo is giving player vibes. In my opinion, Alonzo seems to be a more refined version of Will from the first Mixer, in that he knows how to read the room and strategically choose when to talk about sex with the women. I think that Alonzo's personality will intrigue a number of women for the show, and Alonzo may have at least 3 connections when it's all said and done with. However, I'm almost certain that Alonzo will be single by the time the reunion airs, because I really don't see any of his connections being on the show. Last but not least, I gotta talk about Lamar. And in my opinion, Lamar absolutely has no business being cast on the show, and the only reason he's even on a show like this is because it makes for good TV. During this episode, Lamar told on himself when he said that he could truly be himself because the men had the power to eliminate. And my thing is that this is one of the reasons why the current elimination process is really bad for the show. It causes one group with power to let the power go to their heads and be extremely comfortable with the process, while causing the other group to sort of walk on eggshells and do whatever it takes to stay on the show. In this episode, Lamar broke the first Ready to Love commandment, which is thou shalt not talk about sex too much, especially if thou was a man. Lamar asking the women if they would skinny dip with him, or go to a nude beach with him on a first date, and talking about his love for threesomes. Rashina seemed like she was feeling Lamar the most, but in my opinion, she was just using Lamar to maintain her place on the show. In this episode, we saw Vanessa and Patricia lead the charge and tell the other women how obsessed Lamar is with sex. And to me, this was pretty petty, because it put a target on Lamar's back, and it was likely done because both of the women knew they would be up for elimination, and they wanted to make it easy for the women to eliminate the next guy. Seeing the previews for Lamar, I wouldn't be surprised if he makes it past the next 2 elimination cycles. And like I said earlier, he shouldn't be on the show like this, but I believe that Lamar is a plant by production to keep the ratings up. But this is the end of my review. Feel free to leave all comments below in the comment section, and I'll be sure to reply to everybody. Until next time, stay tuned and stay safe. Peace.